Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Well, friends, it's been an interesting 48 hours. I have just gotten home after having tried to get home for about 48 hours now from a trip to visit my mother-in-law on the East Coast, and share a little bit of that story. But what I want to tie into today is the importance of being clear on what your values are and allowing yourself the opportunities to practice. So often when we are thinking about how to make our lives better, how to get more of the things that we want, whether that's something as simple as closing our notes or staying on time or spending more time with our family, so much of the work is about being really clear of what your values are and where you are in alignment and out of alignment. But again, we're going to talk about this, and I'll share my recent crazy whirlwind experience because it was a really good example of how this shows up in our day-to-day life and how you can get started now. So back up a little bit. I am reading my way through a book called Parents Who Lead. I don't have it in front of me, and I've been awake a really long time, so you can very easily find this book online and see who the authors are. And the pair of authors of this book are primarily focused on leadership, but for this book, they brought it into the parenting realm. So talking about the parents of children being the leaders of their family and sort of building the model from there and pulling on organizational development, leadership principles, and how that can help to reflect on your parenting. And the core focus of the book and the philosophy is being very clear on what your values are as a parent and in your parenting relationship, whatever that looks like. So, oh my goodness, I was reading this book and I spent some time on our vacation during downtime writing through, again, sort of what my values are. I read a lot of different self-help books. I engage in a lot of different kinds of coaching practices myself. And I do these exercises over and over where we do different kinds of values clarification. And we could ask, why are we doing this over and over? But every time someone is asking the questions a little bit differently. And sometimes you're going to pull out a lot more clarity. Things are going to crystallize in a different way. And other times, someone's going to ask the question and you're not really going to be there for it. You don't really jive with the way that they're saying it, right? That is why there are so many different approaches that one could take, and why it can really matter to have somebody's voice that you resonate with when you are trying to work on some area of life improvement. But anyhow, I had sat down and had written out some things. I was chatting with my husband, because that's part of the work in this book is working through this with your partner. And then things really blew up with our travel situation from there. We had been bumped from a flight the night before, so we spent an extra evening with my mother-in-law, which was no big deal, and went to the airport very early. We were routed through a different city. But turns out that city, unbeknownst to us, was not only part of the New York, New Jersey airport system, Newark, right, serving New York City the weekend of the World Cup, right, so things were busy, and a major storm system had rolled through. And so, of course, we tried to get on our connecting flight. It was one of those situations where you sit on the tarmac for 2 hours, nothing's happening, nothing's taking off. They pull you back to the gate. Then, number of hours later, the flight was canceled. Everything was canceled and shut down, right? Just one of these big, crazy situations. And the reason I share this, right, is it's a perfect illustration of one of many circumstances where we have a plan, we have an organized, detailed plan of how things are supposed to go. Something happens, and we could say, well, sure, maybe I should have paid attention that the World Cup was there, but I don't consider myself on the hook for knowing that a storm system was going to route through this area that I wasn't even supposed to be going through, right? Just a total, I don't know, a total coincidence and a bad pileup of situations, which is something that can happen to us in medicine all the time. You look at your schedule, you know how the day is going to go, right? But then one big disaster, one unanticipated thing comes and the day is blown up. Maybe you work in the ER, right? The board is quiet, or you're on L&D, the board is quiet, right? And then something happens, right? And the floodgates open. Perhaps, again, scheduled surgeries, right? There are a number of different places where this can show up. And the reason to bring this illustration, in front of us is simply that when things are getting chaotic, when you're very clear on what your values are, what your priorities are, then it's easier to take action. So this is an example of something that was happening in my personal life, right? It wasn't medically related, but of course, that organized part of my brain that has been trained to respond to urgent and emergent situations was immediately trying to go into disaster mode, right? And figure out where the priorities were, right? Similarly, if you are working in the ER and there's some mass trauma casualty event, right? The team is going to rally together and figure out what are the top priorities. Top priorities, right, are figuring out who is in life-threatening crisis and attend to those things first. Because if you're not clear on what the priorities are and you're walking around passing out Band-Aids, someone is going to exsanguinate, right? We know this in our medical work, but of course it happens in our personal lives as well. The challenge is that in the medical setting, we are trained to go through these kinds of algorithms to organize, to be clear on what the steps and the priorities are, right? That's why we train in ACLS or PALS or any of those things. Or again, if disaster preparedness, we want to be very clear. What is the triage policy? Well, how are we going to get through this as a group? When it comes to our personal lives, we don't always have that organizational structure. We might, but we might not. And this is an example, right, of a situation that was way outside of a normal sort of typical expected thing. But again, being in it, we can see where the values were, we can see where the priorities were, and better be able to navigate it. The same thing could be argued that when things are going well, when you're just in the hum of your normal day-to-day life, whether you are a parent, whether you are partnered, talking about life during the clinical day or life in the non-clinical parts of your day where you're just a human being, right? Being very clear on what your values are, where your priorities are, where you fall into better alignment with the things that you value and where you are not where you want to be allows you to make progress on working towards the things that you want. So again, I had sat down before the day sort of blew up on me and had just clarified. And some of the things that I was writing about were the values of connection with my family, the values of gratitude and generosity, and of responsibility, right? I consider myself to be a highly responsible person who likes to be thought of as dependable. Everyone has their own set of values, of course, and being able to know what your top values are allows you to be very clear on what is important to you. Further, in the activities in this book, there is an opportunity to see where your values are showing up across your personal life, across your work life, across your relationship with community and your relationship with self, and sort of rate how you're doing in terms of the overall amount of time and attention that you give different areas of your life. And so I had just seen, okay, well, I'm not prioritizing my family quite as much as I would like to. So in this situation, having just looked at that and now being in a situation where we're trying to reschedule, we're trying to figure out if we can get home, ultimately realizing that there are no hotels, no flights going out, right? We're not going to be able to leave until the next day. It allowed me to say, all right? The priorities then become protecting the health and safety of my family. Now, we were not in a dangerous circumstance at all, but what became important was trying to allow my kids to feel safe, to have them trust that the situation was going to resolve, to allow them to have, some fun and some ability to relax and some ability for us to be together as a family in this situation where we didn't have a lot of control. It was interesting going through the values activity before and then landing in this, but I can see looking back that allowed me to be very clear on the next steps through this whole process. Because in a different circumstance, I could have spent a lot of time worrying, spinning, fidgeting, trying to do different things to gain control over the situation. And that would not have helped. Yes, there were actions that we did try to take to better optimize the situation than staying overnight in the airport, but none of them were working. And rather than spending more and more time on efforts that felt pretty futile, because again, guys, World Cup means no hotels, no hotels. Being very clear on the priority of wanting to feel connected to my family, definitely not wanting to be part of the mob that was yelling at the gate agents who really couldn't do anything. Wanting to just sort of move through this space and time together with my family with the hopes that we would be getting home. As I was going through, I also found myself coming back to this question that I've been working on integrating in my life for the last couple of years of how can I make this easier? How can I make this easier? How can I make it easier for my kids to feel safe, my kids to feel as comfortable as possible? Of course, we were going to be sleeping on benches and whatever, but I was able to get them blankets. I was able to get them some pillows, right? I was able to help get them, dinner that they would like. I was able to get some groceries ordered, right? So that when we got home, things would be, pretty well. And I was able to ask family members for help from afar. Being very clear that my desire was to be there and connected with my family. And again, give my kids a safe feeling experience in the situation where we didn't have a lot of control was important to me. And being able to be clear on that by having done a values clarification hours before really helped in that process. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because being clear on our values is not something that many of us spend time in doing. We will often spend time thinking about the ways that we're falling short, and that might be at home or at work. We might spend a lot of time preparing an aggressive game plan where we're like, well, I really want to get my health under control, so I'm going to wake up every morning at 5 and I'm going to go to spin class. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to meal prep. I'm never going to touch sugar again. Um, and one thing sort of derails us and the whole plan goes to pot. When we, instead of going into those micromanaging tasks that we're so good at and dial it back and say, what is really important to me here? We're able to do the right work of being clear on, okay, I can see what the priorities are. And if I can see what the priorities are, it makes it easier to decide what do I do and what do I not do, right? If you spend time each month, each week, whatever increment you want to look at, looking at your values and thinking about how it shows up in your life, you will find yourself doing more activities that fall more in alignment and letting go of habits that don't serve those values, that don't feed into the identity that you are trying to move into. There are a lot of great thinkers who have done a lot of work on this. You can read authors like James Clear or BJ Fogg who talk about habits. You can look at any number of different leadership writers, including these two authors. Again, it's called Parents Who Lead, and I'm not going to look it up. We can look it up later. But a lot of these different philosophies boil down to the same thing. And so if this is not something that you've done recently, where you sat down to really look at your values, to clarify what is important to you, not 5 years ago, not when you started medical school, but right here, right now, with what you have going on in your life today, when you can be very clear on what is actually important to you, and you can be very clear on how close you are to being satisfied with how you're operating and where you find yourself getting frustrated because you're not there. You're acting out of alignment with your values. If you want to spend more time with your family and be more present, then we often have to work on putting the phone down, right? Of not doom scrolling when it's time to be together as a family. If we want to be more organized in our clinical work, right, then we're going to have to be focused. Oh, here comes that phone again. And not be scrolling Facebook when you come out of the exam room and it's time to get the work done, right? Meaning like, we're finished seeing the patients for the day and we're turning to social media. We're probably, well, some people might be turning to Facebook in between patients, but I'm a little loopy, guys. What is important is spending time on a regular basis, being very clear and intentional about your values, where you are in alignment and where you are not in alignment with those values, coming from a place of curiosity, not judgment, not meanness, not shame, and then being able to see if this is where I'm at and that is where I want to be going towards. What are the actions that I am going to choose to take, that I'm going to choose to start practicing in order to bring me closer to that version of myself, right? Again, if I'm trying to be more organized with my clinical administrative tasks, right? Finishing my notes, going through the inbox, then I'm going to need to figure out, where am I getting stuck? What parts are slowing me down? And what am I going to start practicing in order to make it better? If I want to be more present with the people that I love, outside of work? What do I need to do more of? And what do I need to let go of, right? Again, I'm going to need to put down my phone. I'm going to need to choose to sit there and tune in and remind myself that I want to listen and be engaged. Now, we might find, of course, that all of these areas touch each other in terms of personal life and professionally. We need to think about how those different parts work together. And that's what they were talking about in the Parents Who Lead book, of thinking about how interwoven the areas of family and work and community and your relationship to yourself are, which was a great approach to really think about. Because obviously, if you are spending a lot of time at work, you have less time for yourself, you have less time for your family, less time for the community. And in doing this journaling exercise where you're looking to see where are you actually spread in your different domains and where do you want to be, right? Then you can start to make shifts. But if we're only living in a space where we have this ideal and we're not looking at where we are, then we don't take the opportunity to make progress. Being clear on what those values are, again, where you are and you're less in alignment, you are more in alignment and less in alignment, and then being able to decide, what will I practice? What will I focus on? What do I need to let go of? What do I need to drop? What do I need to delegate? That becomes the work. Don't start with the to-dos. Start with, why is this important? If I want to be healthier in order to live to, work until I choose to retire. I don't have to retire because of my health, but I choose to retire. If I want to be able to travel into my 80s, what do I need to do now? If I'm very clear that that's my goal, then I get to decide, okay, well, that does mean I get up and do my exercise. It does mean that I pay attention to my nutrition, right? It all comes together. And then when the stuff hits the fan, you also can be more clear on what is important in the situation, especially when it's something you cannot control. All right, guys, that is a little rambly, but I wanted to make sure that I had something for you this week, and I hope you were able to pull out something that feels relevant to your life there. Doing this podcast and doing the one-on-one work that I do with physicians that I coach is very meaningful to me. It does provide me with a lot of personal and professional satisfaction in order to be able to help support this community that I love so much. That's important to me. And, I think it's the reason why you show up here. So, rambling aside, it's time for me to go to bed. I want us to see how these things all fold together. And if you find that you could use some support in helping to sit down and do the work of clarifying your values and figuring out, again, with self-kindness, without judgment, where am I in alignment with these values and where could I use some work in order to help inform the things that I actually spend my time practicing, I want you to reach out. I want you to send me a message. You can reach me, Megan, Megan, at healthierforgood.com. You can go to the website, which is www.healthierforgood.com, and you can schedule a time for us to meet one-on-one. I'd love to hear from you. It's time for me to go to bed because my health is also important, and it's time for me to sleep. Until next week, I hope you have a good one. Take care.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.